the team at Momentum Ministry Partners. I'm the Executive Director of Leadership Development. But before that, I actually, after high school, went into nursing and then worked at university, became Dean of Students, and then my church recruited me into ministry, and I've been doing that for about 20 years now. So I'm very passionate about this idea of women and career and how God calls us to many seasons of life. And so I've asked a couple of friends here to join me this morning. This is one of the first Power Tracks we've ever had about this topic. So I'm really excited that you guys are a part of this inaugural group. We're going to leave plenty of time at the end for people who want to ask questions, because at the end of the day, each of the callings that God has on our life is very unique and very different. That's one of the reasons why it's important to hear from other women and hear their stories and their examples, and then also get your specific questions answered, to the kind of things that God might be stirring your heart, the questions you have particularly about your own unique calling and how you can honor God in that. So I'm excited to get rolling. Let me start by opening us up in prayer, then I'll introduce our guests for today. Father God, thank you so much, Lord. Thank you for these incredible young women that you have gifted and handcrafted and called to serve in your kingdom. I pray that you would be speaking to them all throughout this conference, but particularly in this session, Lord. Open their hearts and their minds to the amazing life you have in store for them, for the incredible potential you've planted within them, and for the doors you're going to open, for the possibilities that are ahead of them. And God, help us all just to not think small. Help us to think big and open, and to take advantage of everything that you have for us in this beautiful gift of life. Bless our speakers today. Help us to say the right things that will be the most helpful to the most people. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, I'm going to start. I'm going to let each of you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the kind of work you do, and then we'll jump into seasons of womanhood.
My name is Jessica Bricker, and I have 3 awesome kids. 2 of them are in here. And I started off my career working in public accounting, and then worked in the orthopedic industry and finance for about 15 years. And for about the last 7 years, I do financial planning or financial advising, where I help people with their money.
Hi, I'm Laura Ritchie. I'm from Martinsburg, Pennsylvania. I am a biochemistry professor at a small regional campus at the University of Pittsburgh, so it's a public school where I teach college students, and so I feel like this is my office, and just a science classroom. So.
Great, thank you. Yes, we're in the nursing lab, so I mentioned I was a nurse too. I know we both walked in and we're like, look, it's like a laboratory. So one of the things that we found in navigating just the life of being a woman, in career callings, we really don't have a lot of big differences in the actual marketplace jobs, but navigating our life as women does have a lot more seasons and a lot more nuances than most men navigate. And so I'd love to hear from you two, especially when you think back to high school and maybe like young adult years. What were the ways that you sensed God calling you into your career, and maybe even calling you, like whether or not you wanted to get married, whether or not you wanted to have children, maybe where you wanted to live? Those are all big decisions that really impact our life. How did you sense God leading you in those decisions?
So my dad was a pastor growing up, so grew up in a great Christian home. And, you know, a lot of girls always think about their wedding and having kids and wanting to stay home. And I wanted those things, but that wasn't something that was the only thing that I wanted. I feel like God wired me in a unique way and has given me some different wiring and ability that using it is an act of stewardship. And so I sort of always knew that I would want to do something work-wise and try to figure out how to balance kind of being a mom and being able to use the gifts that God has given me.
Yeah, so similarly, I always envisioned myself both as a mom and working. Growing up, I had a great family that helped make that a reality, helped not look at me like that was weird. And I grew up going to conference, and I was on travel teams, and I always remember the call to full-time ministry. And I would always say, like, God, are you calling me? Like, I want to serve you. I know I want to give you my life. Is it in this direction? Like how are you going to use it? And I never felt a call to full-time vocational ministry. I even prayed, like, in our churches, we don't have women pastors, so I even prayed, like, even if it's a pastor's wife, if you're calling me to be that. And I never really felt that, but I always, like, in school settings, I always loved science, my science classes, my math classes. I loved learning. I loved, like, learning what we were doing, and did really well at school. I think that's something God's given me too, gifted me in. But each of those, like, calls to ministry, I almost sensed God saying, like, no, I have something different for you. Like, I have this other path that's different. And fortunately, I had a family that recognized that and was able to say, like, that is still following Jesus. And it's not less than these paid positions. And so last year, if you were here at conference last year, when they really started kicking off some of this marketplace stuff, I was so hyped that, like, you're hearing this too, if you don't have that family background to encourage you through the workplace.
Yeah. And I would add that family background for me was really important too, because for us, when we were just starting our careers, things were a lot different in terms of expectations, like within the church. And I've even had situations where people in the church have said things to me about working. So one example was I was at a women's retreat probably 10 years ago, and there was a woman in my group who said, I think a woman's job is at home with her kids. She should be raising her kids and not working outside the home. And you kind of have to develop thick skin to be able to manage that sometimes. So I didn't let it bother me. I just assumed maybe she didn't intend to come across the way she did. And about a year later, I was in front of our church because I serve on the business commission, kind of helping with things financial. And I was giving an update and talking through things. And about a week later, I got a letter in the mail from that same lady. And she said, wow, I'm so sorry for the things that I said, because I can see how God has wired you and how he's using you and your gifts. And so, like, almost 2 pages worth of apologies. So that was something she didn't need to do, and it was really surprising that she did that. But all of that to say, you may have adversity, as you're sort of trying to navigate your path.
That's a really powerful story. I think all of us, and probably you, have also run into people who have judgments or thoughts about what you should or shouldn't do. It's very rare you get an apology letter about it, so that's really beautiful. So my story is, I'm going to share my stuff too, because I'm in charge of the panel, so I'm going to share my stuff. I grew, in case this is helpful to anybody, I grew up in a very conservative church environment. I actually grew up in Montana, and our church was pretty small. We had about 100 people in it, and when I say conservative, I didn't realize that growing up. Kind of like, I grew up a little on the poor side. I didn't know that we were poor, because we, like, ordered pizza once a week, and, it felt like my birthdays were great. But now that I'm older and I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, my mom was, a working single mom. She was a secretary. We lived in a rental house my whole life. It just happened to be across the street from the school, so I could access things and do lots of stuff. So I didn't feel left out of anything. But now that I look back, and definitely on my church experience, which was a huge piece of my community and kind of my sense of family, we had some really specific roles about what good, godly women did and what they didn't do. And I would say I didn't realize it at the time, but I'm not really a rule breaker. I'm more like a rule follower. So I just kind of like took that template in my mind without even thinking about it or questioning it, and just said, oh, it seems like if you really love God and you're a woman, you do things like marry a pastor, or you go into elementary education so you can work with children in the church. And I wanted to serve God. I love God. I'd given my heart to him. I cared deeply about my life mattering. And so when I went to college, and my sister and I were the first in our family to go to college, so I didn't have a lot of people ahead of me. I didn't have a lot of templates or examples of particularly women in my community, in my school maybe, or in the city I lived in, but not in close by. And so I just sort of went to college really unconsciously going like, my goal here is probably to get married to someone who also loves God, and we'll serve him together and do lots of things together. And I actually got engaged to be married while I was in college to this really great Christian guy who was going to be a pastor. And I was at a Christian college, and so there's always like this worship night at Christian colleges. You guys have that? And there's so he was the leader of this worship night, and so I just thought it was great. He answered the phone, "Jesus loves you," and I'm like, you can't get any more godly than that. And so we were sort of like on our way. And I was majoring in elementary education, and I was like, rediscovering my love of the piano because I thought I probably better play the piano too. And so all of these things that I could do, and I was capable of doing, and I cared about doing it, and I was disciplined enough to make those things happen for myself because I really did want to serve God. And in the middle of that, I was attending a church, and a woman had a discipleship group for young women. So I started going to it, and she basically walked us through kind of all the basics of the faith that I knew most of, but there were a few things in there that my church didn't teach me. So I grew up in a very black and white church, there were things that were right and things that were wrong, but there's a lot of gray areas in the sense of who God made you uniquely to be, the kind of calling God has for you, that you can be a woman that's not just quiet and meek and only does what other people say. You can have, a voice and leadership and gifts that are more loud or forward. And so all of a sudden I kind of got this more colorful view of what calling could look like, and that I can know if I'm doing the right things. That it's not just right or wrong, that I can actually have God's peace in knowing his voice in my particular life. And so as soon as those things started to open up in my heart, all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I don't actually think I'm supposed to marry this guy. Turns out just because you're a Christian and going to be a pastor doesn't mean it's the greatest marriage partner for you. So that was a new concept to me. So I ended up breaking off my engagement. I dropped out of education, switched my major to nursing because I thought, well, if I'm not going to get married to a pastor, I'm probably going to be called to be single my whole life, which didn't happen. I guess I was young, and those were the two extremes. You either marry a pastor or you're a missionary. Those felt like the two ways a woman serves God. And so I became a nurse. I ended up moving to Florida. When I graduated school, I was a psychiatric nurse in an inpatient locked unit. I served at my church a lot. So that started my career, but that whole mentality of those biases or those boxes or those limitations that I interpreted from just the people I knew in my church, I interpreted as God's truth for me. Now, they were all fulfilling God's call in their life, but God had something different for me, and I wasn't sure how to be open to that without feeling like I was doing something wrong. And so I just share that story to say we all, and I think the older we get, most of us end up seeing a therapist at some point to kind of be like, how did I grow up? What did my mom and dad do that I liked, that I didn't like? What about my siblings? What about the church I grew up in, the town I grew up in, the teachers I had? How can I take the great things from them? I learned an amazing biblical background in the church. They love God, they serve, they sacrifice for him a lot. I want to keep those great things, and I want to not keep the things that made me feel limited or less than in my calling or what God had for me. Does that make sense? Okay, so those will be great things as you begin your journey to challenge yourself. Am I making these decisions because I don't think there's anything else for me? Am I making these decisions because God's calling me to it? Am I just exploring and I want to look at my options? You have many, many years to figure that out. And from that time, I've had 8 different careers. So I feel like I just keep moving forward in the new things God has for me. I don't know anyone else who has a career path like I do, but I still am employable. So I'm very grateful about that. Other people have very, I'm going to be this and I do that my whole life. My journey is very eclectic. And so there is no one right way to lead a godly life as a woman. There's no one right way. There's just your way. And so the pursuit of that with the Lord is part of the adventure of life, and part of what discovering God's will for your life looks like is that I can almost guarantee you, especially in terms of career, the thing that God is calling you to do in your career probably doesn't even exist yet. Your biggest impact is probably not even a job yet. Our world is changing so quickly. And so just be open to the new things God has for you. Do you guys have any comments on that? Or ways that God? Okay. So I would love to know from the two of you. So one of the things we find in research, so since then I've gone on to write a couple books about this topic, about being a woman from a faith background, what it is that our churches do to help us really find our calling and not. And so I've studied quite a bit of research on this. And one of the most challenging things for women in discerning calling is that we have a lot of different callings in our life. There isn't just one thing we're going to do. You're probably going to work and have a career. You're probably going to have responsibilities with your family, whether or not you get married, whether or not you have your own kids. You're a daughter, you're a sister, you're a friend, you're going to be a church member. You have all these roles that you play. And at different seasons in life, those things take different priorities. And so one of the biggest challenging ones to kind of navigate is this idea of having a career. Do I work full-time? Do I work part-time? How many children do I want to have? Do I want a big family? Do I want a small family? Am I working in the midst of that? Do I take a break? So I'd love to hear from both of you. When did you decide that you wanted to have children? How did you decide how many? And then what did you do in terms of priorities around your career to fulfill both your calling as a mom and your calling as a marketplace leader? Do you want to go first?
Sure. So I have two kids. They're both boys, 5 and 2, so we're still in the little years. And I'm currently a proud boy mom, so
Yes.
lots of messes and wrestling and craziness. Fortunately, I have 2 younger brothers to see how that all works. But I always kind of knew I wanted to be a mom as well. While I was deciding what I wanted to do with this love for science and trying to figure out how that all worked, I knew I actually wasn't attracted to the medical field. I thought, I love science. Usually you go to the medical field. I don't really want to go into the medical field. So I was exploring different options, and one of my cousins is a professor at another school, and that's when I first was like, that's interesting. So I actually found another female professor, when I was in high school. I even went up and shadowed her and kind of saw what that was like, and she was a mom, because I wanted to kind of target something that I knew I could be a mom at the same time. And fortunately, my job's pretty flexible. There are times it's not flexible and it's busy. There's a lot of hours, but they're flexible hours. And so you can kind of rearrange that, how it works. And it's a step at a time, right? You don't know your full, just kind of like Katie said, you don't know what the end goal is going to be. I still don't know where all God's going to lead me. But for now, we take a step at a time and we see how to make these two things work. And gathering your village around you, they always say it takes a village to raise a child. That's so true, especially as a working mom. To find good childcare, whether it's family or outside of the home. So building that village even now is important. Knowing who people you can turn to help you and help you make those decisions.
Can you talk a little bit about flexibility? So there's flexibility in hours of the day or hours of the week, and then holidays or summers. Just be real specific.
Okay. So it's all flexibility. So I have to teach a couple classes every day. Outside of that, I have some office hours, and so I can show up to my office as long as it's before my classes. That's fine, and I can leave when I need to. And so if there's doctor's appointments, kids have a lot of doctor's appointments.
Yeah.
So if there's doctor's appointments or other things, I can leave and do that. Now that often means I have to do grading and stuff at home. I have to take some of that work home with me. It's not something I just leave at work. And like some working moms, I have friends that are very clear, this is work. I leave my work at work. That way I can focus family at home. My job's just different, and that's where your path could look different than my path.
That's good.
Like I don't teach on Tuesdays usually, so I stay home on Tuesdays. Again, that means the time that I need to get work done needs to happen at other times, because with 2 little boys at home, you're not going to get a whole lot of work done. So yeah, it's a little bit flexible. Again, because I'm at a college campus, I'm able to come to Momentum this week. I have a lot of my summer off. It's not fully off, but mostly off. Holidays, weekends. Again, but I do have to fit in time. I'm not saying it's like
Good.
I work 20 hours a week.
And I'm assuming you have Christmases off. You have a little break in that. Do you teach during the summer?
I don't teach during the summer because I'm in the sciences where we usually do research over the summer. So I'm in the lab sometimes with students, sometimes on my own, getting research done over the summer. So I have a little bit of responsibilities. My contract is only 8 months. But again, to get the work done, sometimes you have to go outside of that 8-month contract. Yeah.
Jessica?
So my husband and I always wanted to have kids. So when we were dating and we talked about that. So we waited a few years after we were married. And one of the things we did before we had kids was live off of one income. That way we had flexibility so that when we had kids, we could make a decision based on what we wanted to do versus having, financial constraints and having to pick a path. So I think, part of not knowing, like 10 years ago, I would have no idea that I would be doing what I'm doing now. It's just really hard to see. Have you guys ever gone out to your vehicle after a storm, like a snowstorm, and you kind of scrape it off and you can just kind of see through this little hole sometimes, so you can kind of keep an eye on where you think the center line is and the other line. That's sometimes what it's like, is God just gives us a little view. And so just kind of keeping your eye on the lines and seeing where he's leading you in that path, because you just don't know what bends and curves happen along the way.
That's good.
And then I think just with the seasons, there are lots of different seasons and chapters. So when we first had kids, I had to sort of blaze a trail because there were not part-time or flexible work arrangements where I was working. And so had to figure out and sort of propose, hey, can we try this arrangement? We'll reassess it in 90 days. If it doesn't work, then we can come up with another plan. So have had lots of different forms of what that looks like in terms of flexibility. And same thing, it doesn't mean, in some ways I had to work harder to make it work. It's just about having the flexibility of when I was working to be able to be a good mom for my kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are very great. Thank you both. So one of the things that I found in motherhood, I just have one son, he's in college age now, but I think choosing a profession that has flexibility if you know you want to be a mom. This is one of the things that makes teaching really attractive to a lot of young women, because you have summers off and holidays off. You're on a school schedule with your kids. There's a lot of great benefits to that. But there are other careers that have that kind of flexibility. You mentioned being able to renegotiate your job. And so one of the things that I found, at least in my journey, because I got married a little bit later, we weren't able to have children right away. We wanted to, but we ended up waiting 5 years. So I didn't have my son until I was 31. Now, the benefit of that to me now that I look back on is I was actually able to get my master's degree. I had 2 career shifts in that and really grew in leadership in that 10 years between graduating college and having my first child. That allowed me a lot of ability to be flexible with my role because I knew what I was doing. I was really proficient and good at my career. And so when I went to my boss and said, hey, I'm going to have a baby, he's like, what do we need to do to keep you? Like, how can we change your job? Do you want to go part-time? Do you want weekends off? Like, what is it that we can do to make things work for you? And so that's another approach, is that if you feel called to a certain industry or a certain career and you're like, how does this work? I have friends who are doctors, and they did all their medical school training, all their residencies, and had children after, once they have their own practice, where you get to set your own hours, when you get to create your own business. But they went into it knowing that, and so they were very strategic in how they kind of invested in their career early on so they could be in the hours or the flexibility that they wanted afterwards. So one of the things that has changed a lot for women in having careers, and particularly with motherhood, is the role that husbands play at home. I would say when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of dads who were racing home to do car pickup or go to doctor's appointments. And we see a lot of men really wanting to be engaged as dads more. I know the first professional conference I went to, it was the break time at the conference, and all the moms were out on the sidewalk calling home to see how their kids were and did they get home from school. And now I go to a conference and it's filled with dads calling home and FaceTiming their little one. How was preschool today, bud? And so men are much more engaged as parents. There's a lot more shared labor at home, and as more and more women enter the workforce and are fully educated, it's shifting the way our family dynamics change. And I mostly go to pastors' conferences, so these are a lot of Christian families who are really renegotiating that. So I'd love to know from the two of you, how have you and your husband talked through the division of labor at home? Because there's a lot of work to do running a home. There's a lot of work to do in parenting and taking care of kids, and sort of gone are the days where the woman does it all and, fries the bacon and brings home the money and all the things, right? It's much more shared labor. What are some of the ways that you two have navigated what the division of that is and how that works together?
So we don't have strict lists of who does what, but my husband is awesome and helps out a ton. So he affirms kind of how I'm wired and my calling, and we work together to make sure as a unit that our family is functioning well and things are going well. So he helps out around the house. He does the dishes all the time. He can clean up the house, like pick it up faster than anyone. So we share a ton of responsibilities and things. So I think it's just communication and sort of setting expectations. I think for a lot of people, disappointment in life comes from unmet expectations. So if you can sort of talk about those things up front and agree upon, and for us, it may look different than for another couple, and that's okay. It's kind of what works for us and sort of what we come to agreement on.
Yeah, same thing. It's all about communication. It's all about how you communicate, what your expectations are, and making sure that they're realistic expectations too. I joked about praying that even if it's a pastor's wife. Well, when my husband and I first got married, when we were dating, he wasn't aiming to go into ministry. We were going to do ministry on the side, help with the youth group. He's a musician, so helping to lead worship. Both of our parents have done that, have had outside jobs and then really served in the church, so we have that modeled really well. Then God called him to be a pastor. So I did also become a pastor's wife, but that wasn't the original target. So because his schedule is also not a normal 9-to-5 job, he has Mondays off. And so even in the practical timing and who's taking care of our kids, we're able to kind of work that. And everyone's situation is going to be different, how that works. And so to lean into your even giftings in the home, what you're naturally gifted at, although there are some things neither of you are going to be naturally gifted at. And so being able to communicate and let the other one know if there's a extra busy season. Christmas time for the worship pastor is very busy at the church. And so I do extra work at home during that time. I have more of the responsibilities. When it's finals time for me and there's a lot of grading, he will do extra work. When I have to submit a big portfolio for work, he takes over extra responsibilities. And so it's balancing that, it's managing it, and we have loose division of labor in the house, but it's always shifting, it's always changing. So it again comes back to communication.
And one thing that's sort of a little bit of a side conversation to this, as women, sometimes women are our toughest critics. And so I talked about we have, with our husbands, how it works for our families. And sometimes it's I don't know if you have had this happen, but little snide remarks from other women about, oh, you don't do that, or just different things. And so that's where that thick skin and just being confident in where God has you and in your relationship with your spouse and how you have it set up, I think is really important, because otherwise those things can sort of build up and really begin to bother you. So as a woman, as you guys move forward, encourage each other. Like, be each other's best supporters and encouragers, even if someone's path looks different than yours and you don't understand the path that they're on, because we need each other and to support each other.
That's right. Yeah, I think anybody ever struggle with comparison or noticing other people or on social media? Yeah, this is a lifelong challenge for every human, probably. I think for women it's particularly challenging in some dynamics, and in motherhood, there can easily be a lot of comparison games. And sometimes you hear snide remarks from other women or you feel pressure, but sometimes we do it to ourselves. I know for me, I can get on Instagram and scroll through things and I'm like, well, I'm at this conference in Indiana launching a big program, but I'm not home making fruit roll-ups from scratch in my garden in the back. And, I've got terrible mothers. So part of it is giving yourself permission to know what your strengths are. So when we talk about your unique giftedness and the unique calling God has on you, that calling goes into your career, but it also goes into your relationships and particularly into your motherhood. So my best friend and I are very different. We've been best friends since we were 15 years old. We met our freshman year of high school. And we're both moms now and have our own businesses, each of us. But we make decisions and we have priorities that are very different based on the calling that God put on our lives. So particularly in motherhood, when we were sort of raising our kids, especially when their kids were at home and it was really busy, I was very quick to outsource cleaning my house. When I have any extra money, the first thing I don't go out to eat, I don't go to movies, I don't buy furniture, I don't get new clothes, I buy a housekeeper. Because the last thing I want to do is clean my house. I do not enjoy it. I'm not very good at it. I'm up for it maybe once a year. Feels like a production, and then I feel like that should last the whole rest of the year. Not my gifts. Those aren't the things that I'm really good at. I spend way too much time trying to strategize the plugins to the vacuum cleaner around the house. It's ridiculous. So, but I am a teacher, and I'm a strategist, and I'm a communicator. And so when my son was struggling in math in 5th grade, I took 2 days off of work, and we did mom math camp, and we cracked the times tables, right? That is what I do. I tutored him after school. I was all about homework. That's my gift. Now, my friend Karen, on the other hand, anytime she tried to help either of her kids with homework, they got in huge fights. She's not a great teacher. She got irritated with them. She's really smart. It comes naturally to her. But when she is stressed, you know what she loves to do? Clean the house. So all of any extra money for her went to outsourcing tutoring, and she's in there scrubbing away at the tub, and I'm doing just the opposite. And we both did exactly the kind of motherhood our kids needed. Yeah. Because God gives you the kids that you are made to parent. And so when you're watching other women be moms, those are the moms those kids need. Those aren't the moms that your kids need. So you living into your giftedness, you living into who God made you to be, you bringing your best self to your kids is the best gift you can give them, and let the rest of the things go. That's why you mentioned a village, to raise a child. It takes a body. That's why the body of Christ, 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, lists all the gifts of the Spirit. We need those in our church communities. We need those in our families, and we need those in the communities that we build to raise our children. So your gifts matter to your kids and to other kids, and those other moms' gifts matter to your kids also, and we all get everything that.
Can I add
Please.
Something? So one other thing is you don't have to do it all. So don't be afraid to ask for help or to accept help. Sometimes our pride or feeling like, well, I could clean my house, right? It's really important to have a balance and to prioritize the things. So for Katie, it's spending time with her son at mom math camp. And so just being comfortable with that and not being afraid to outsource or to ask for help.
Yeah. In fact, I can guarantee you can't do it all. God purposefully creates limitations in our life so that we engage other people. So it is a lie that we can have it all and do it all. And you do get to have everything God has for you, but it doesn't all come at the same time. And so, I've got kids older than all of you, so I have an empty nest. Well, when I had a baby, my life was really oriented around my kid and other people's kids and having a family. My life right now is full on career, and it is the most freeing, fun thing. I'm on the road half the time of the year. It has been absolutely a joy to be able to dive in fully into my career. And it was absolutely a joy to be a stay-at-home mom for 5 years. I loved it. So whatever God calls you in the moment, be fully in it and know that you'll get all the opportunity to do all the things God has called you to do. It just probably isn't going to be all exactly at the same time. Okay, I want to open it up for some questions from the room. So we've got about 20 minutes. Please don't hold back. We'll create a tree of trust here. Feel free to ask the question that needs to happen. Who's got a question for one of our panelists? Yes.
When you were looking at your job position, did you take into consideration the maternity leave that they offer?
Great question. Renee, are we recording this?
Yes.
Okay. So the question is, when we were looking at finding our positions, did we take into consideration one of the benefits of being employed by an organization, which is the maternity leave?
I did not directly at the time, but I did consider, as I was looking at options, sort of the work-life balance at different places. So, for example, I interviewed when I first went into the orthopedic industry. I interviewed at 2 companies and had offers from them. One of them, 2 of the people I was supposed to interview with got pulled into something else while I was there. And from talking with others, I could see a clear indication that work-life balance was really, really challenging. So I did consider that. I think benefits and maternity leave, even paternity leaves, are becoming so much more common and prevalent that's becoming, it's a lot better even than it was when I was having kids.
Yeah, I didn't directly look at that either. I knew kind of what I wanted to do. It was probably there, but I didn't look at any specifics.
So from an HR perspective, that's what my graduate degree is in, there are some things that are universal to any job that you get. If you run your own business or you work for yourself, you have a lot of flexibility, but it also means you eat the cost of taking maternity leave. There is a national, a federal law called Family Medical Leave Act, which means that you have the right to leave your job for up to 3 months for maternity leave, and they have to guarantee you a similar job coming back. But that doesn't necessarily mean you get paid for that, it just means your job is protected. And then in addition to that, there's usually insurance benefits that kick in, like short-term disability that would pay part of your salary. Pregnancy is considered a short-term disability, like labor and delivery considered a short-term disability, so you qualify. So part of it is looking at those pieces. I think that's a really smart thing to look at. I will say, I'd be curious if you give me a thumbs up or thumbs down on this, but from my perspective, the maternity leave, which is usually around 3 months, is kind of the standard break women take, is so small compared to motherhood and this kind of work-life balance that even in situations where maybe it's not ideal or there aren't a lot of benefits around maternity leave, if there are other work-life balance that are going to pay off longer, those are probably more important things to look at. Would you both agree?
For sure, yeah.
Okay, great.
Can I
Other?
add something? Sure.
I will say, and again, it depends what career you're going to go on. You can't fully plan when you have kids, like the time of the year. And so we, to be real, we had a miscarriage before. We didn't get pregnant right away either. But because I have summers off, I thought it would be really nice if we could have a baby at the beginning of summer. Then I don't even have to worry about maternity leave. And so God was able to do that, for our firstborn. The secondborn, then I thought, I kind of do want to take some time off. And so, again, you can't plan it exactly, but you can kind of, target certain windows if that's important to you too, and if your career allows it.
Yeah, it is true though, you have much less control over the timing of these things than you think you're going to.
Right.
So, okay, other questions? Yes.
Do any of you have siblings that also have kids, and did they choose a different path for you? How did that family pressure possibly play in?
Yeah, great question. How about the role of siblings in kind of your family of origin as you plan family? Good luck.
Oh, go ahead.
So I'm the oldest. My sister is 3 years younger than me, and we were super close all growing up. And she was a nurse, but then is staying home. And it's hard to predict what she's going to do. It's hard to predict what any of us are going to do. But my sister especially seems to like change her mind a lot. But she's very
Let's go
like,
with nursing.
yeah, she loves being a stay-at-home mom. I don't think I could do that. I don't think our personalities are different. And sometimes I do feel that pressure. I see her being able to take her kids on spontaneous trips during the day and go different places and sleep in. And I do feel that sometimes, like that pressure, like that does look nice. But again, that comparison. I know how God has wired me. By the end of summer, I am ready to go back to work. I am ready to do what God's created me to do in this season. And so, yes, I definitely feel that family pressure sometimes. But again, giving it over to God and being reminded of I am different from my sister. We're not the same person. We're wired differently.
And I think work-life balance is a misnomer. I think it's more like work-life sway. So sometimes you're trying to keep it near the middle, but sometimes you're going one way, one direction or another. And so one of the things that I've always felt is that tension as I'm managing. And I feel like it's a healthy tension because I'm not able to give the same at home as a stay-at-home mom all the time. And the same thing at work. So as I'm managing that tension, it's not going to look the same as someone who's a stay-at-home mom making homemade fruit roll-ups that are organic and from the garden strawberries. But and then at work, sometimes there are limitations with kid things we have going on or family responsibilities. So there's a level of confidence that you have to have and ability to sort of manage the tension that comes with that.
One great resource is a small book by Andy Stanley. Renee, can you look up the new name of it? Choosing to Cheat. Yeah, it's got a new title though. He rebranded it because that doesn't fly as well anymore. But Pastor Andy Stanley. So one of the things that I found, because especially you and I, Jessica, we're kind of the first generation of women to really do both lifelong career and motherhood at the same time, is a lot of the books I had to read were about being a dad. And it really is not about being a dad, it's about having a job and balancing home responsibilities. And so his book, did you find it?
Yep.
What's it called?
When Work and Family Collide.
When Work and Family Collide.
Your family.
When Work and Family Collide. And he talks about this more of a sway perspective, where there are some decisions that you're going to make that are going to cheat your home life. That's why it's choosing to cheat. Like, for example, my son had some issues at school for a while. And so for me, picking him up at school and downloading the day was like the number one most important thing in his life in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, which meant I left my office at 2:30. Now, at the time, I was executive director of multi-site at a church of 20,000 people. We had 9 sites. I had 400 people report to me. So it's a very big job. It was a very stressful job. And leaving at 2:30 was highly unusual. But it was the most important thing to my kid. And so I rearranged my schedule, worked with my assistant, worked around all my meetings. I did phone calls on the way to the school. I gave him an hour and a half or 2 hours. We had dinner together, and then he did homework, and I went back to work in the evenings. And so I got my whole work done, but the thing I sacrificed was 3 to 5 in the workplaces where almost all the hangout, relationship building, big decisions get made. So for 2 or 3 years, my career took a little bit of a stall. And I don't know that anyone else would notice it, but I knew it. I could feel it. I was a little out of the loop. I didn't have quite the connection with everybody that I thought, but my kid got back on track, and so it was so worth it. Later in high school, he's like off with his driver's license. I don't see him. So I'm working till 6 or 7 at night. I can reinvest in my career. And now I got to stay up till 11:30 because only teenagers apparently want to talk after 10 p.m. I'm not sure what is up with that. But now I'm readjusting my sleep schedule. Like I'm half asleep all the time. So there's a time when kind of you cheat work a little bit to make your family work. And then you cheat family a little bit to make your work. And so keeping those things in balance and making sure you're doing well in both, that's sort of the work-life balance. And when one starts to break, or if you're cheating one to other and you don't have the flexibility to go back and serve the other, that's when you know that it might be time for a change.
And I think it's so important to have people in your life that you can help evaluate some of these things. It's not just set it and the course works. So I think you have to just constantly be evaluating, whether it's with your husband, whether it's with another working mom that you really admire, whether it's with someone in a small group.
And your peers at work also.
And your peers at work. So all of those people to help you kind of gauge that.
So in the research around high capacity female leaders, and I would say this is especially true for women from a faith background, is that our biggest challenge is not performance, it's actually perfectionism. And so the standards we hold ourselves to, the bars we want to meet, the people pleasing we're conditioned to try and do, really sometimes locks us in a box that makes us feel like if I'm not knocking it out of the park every single day at work, I'm probably about to get fired. Very extreme thinking. And so sometimes your peers at work and your boss, now this is not an everyday question, but on your performance review every 6 months to be able to say, how do you honestly think I'm doing in my job? That was one of the biggest things that allowed me to leave at 2:30s, because I would say things like, tell me how I'm doing, give me really honest feedback. Do you feel like I'm missing anything? Am I dropping any balls? And he's like, no. And I'm like, oh, well, for the last 8 months I've been leaving at 2:30. And he's like, we didn't even notice. I'm like, that's great, right? Because if he had said things aren't going well, you need to really shore it up, people are missing you, you're not in the loop on things, that feedback helps me know, am I working that sway well or am I not? And being able to get really good feedback, even as parenting, like, how is my kid doing? Sometimes your kid is struggling, has nothing to do with you. Sometimes your kid is struggling, has a lot to do with you. And so getting really good feedback from people on where am I hitting it, where am I not, what can I tighten up, and having the Lord lead us on what those priorities are really makes a difference. Okay, great questions. We have time for a couple more. Yes, in the back.
You talked a lot about your relationship with the workplace and kids. Can you expand more on your relationship with your husbands and how that works, trying to balance all three of those things?
Sure.
I think your relationship with your husband needs to be prioritized over your kids, although in these little years it's not always a time-wise. And so I think going back even to talking about comparing yourself, and we often compare ourselves to each other as women, but I think sometimes as married women we compare our spouses to other spouses, and we see what their husband's doing that, why is my husband not doing that? And so even managing your expectations, and that's kind of like marriage universal, not just working moms, but I have to remember that too. Our life is going to look different. Our marriage is going to look different than other marriages, but still prioritizing that so that. And again, it's not always hours of the day. I think sometimes when we talk about prioritizing things, we think we need to line up the hours of the day and work's getting 40 hours a week. I don't think I'm giving my spouse 40 hours a week, and then my kids, and then really God should be number one. So how, there's, the hours aren't that, you can't line up the hours for that. But it's checking what your thoughts are, right? We're supposed to take every thought captive. I think that's even in how we are viewing our spouse and how we are viewing our marriage. And so I think it is important if you're not married yet and you're wanting to go into a career, to find someone that supports you in that and is going to encourage you. Like Jessica said at the beginning, finding that person to really support you and speak into your giftings is huge.
We're running out of time.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, okay. Sorry.
God first, your spouse second, and then your kids. So we go on old people walks at night, so I get some exercise, and it's kind of a date night. So that's one way right now in this season that we sort of prioritize our time together. I do my devotions in the morning. And on the way into work, listen to the Bible recap, which is kind of reading through the Bible. So just kind of a way to manage and get a couple things done at the same time.
I think, too, when both of you talked about communication with your spouse around children and responsibilities, I think that's one really important thing to do before you get married. As you're dating, the conversation isn't just, do you want to have kids, do you don't? It's how do we want to have kids and how do we want to parent? What's the kind of family we want to build together? It's part of what you build together in your marriage is your family and your legacy, and what does that look like? And so really talking through expectations that you have of what your role will be, what his role will be, what that will be in your home, what that will be in your parenting, how you'll partner together, how you complement or challenge or even align with each other in that are all really good things to explore as you decide who your marriage partner is and who God has called you to build your life with. And I'll share a little of my story just in case any of you have an experience like this later. But when I was growing up, I actually didn't have any career aspirations. I really just wanted to be married and have a big family. And I was going to have like 8 children. I was going to organize the heck out of my home and like write some book on it probably one day. I was going to adopt kids from another country because I thought that was really cool before it got trendy. So now I'm like... So when I got married, especially after I broke off my engagement, I really didn't think I would get married. And so I was just going to do orphanages overseas or something. And so when I fell in love and got married, it was a very big surprise to me. And I was sort of like primed for just volunteering at my church and having a big family and kind of running the homeschool co-op or something. And 5 years into our marriage, when I was pregnant with our first child, my husband had a really serious accident. And so he worked at a Christian school. He was on a lift. You've seen those cherry picker lifts that like lift you to the top. He was the IT guy, and he was installing some equipment on the top of the gymnasium, and it fell over with him in it. And so he really should have been killed or paralyzed in the accident, but he ended up breaking multiple bones in his body, fractured all the bones in his face. And so he went through serious major reconstructive surgery and really had a lifelong journey of chronic pain and mental health issues from that traumatic brain injury. And so pregnant and with a husband in like full rehab, we had our first child, which ended up being our only child because we couldn't really have any more kids after that just because of the demands on his physical and mental life. And so I ended up staying in work full time because I had to, because he wasn't able to go back to work. And so my career path was more thrust upon me than it was by my choosing. And so part of me sort of navigating even whether or not to leave nursing, my work at the university, going into full-time ministry, was partly trying to take care of someone, partly the benefits that it would allow us to do because our healthcare expenses were very expensive, and also trying to raise a child in the middle of that situation. And so part of how we negotiated that was our life looked really different than anybody else's. And I would say even the career advancements I have were mostly just miracles along the way because a lot of years we were just I was just trying to survive and keep everybody alive. And so even as you make plans, even as you imagine your life, even as you discern with the Lord what those God dreams are, many times those desires in our hearts, those wonderings about what God might want to do with us, the pathway he has for answering those calls are not easy and straight. They're usually crooked and bumpy. And I found that most of the time when I really am following God's call on my life, it's through what feels like a detour or a block. I think I'm going this way, but my life is actually forcing me into this lane. And so being obedient to the doors that God opens to you, embracing the challenges, letting go of the preconceived notions of what a good Christian, godly woman life looks like, and instead putting all that to the side and saying, God, I'm here, I'm open, I'll do whatever it is you called me to do. Whatever that looks like, however I can honor and obey you in the situation you're putting me in, give me grace for today. And it will be amazing, the doors that God will open to you and the impact he'll gift you to have simply through obedience, not because of something you figured out or conquered or strategized as a young person. So there's a lot of freedom in that. There's a lot of challenge in that, but there's a lot of hope in that. And I feel really confident looking at each one of you here that God has some big plans for the young women in this room. And we will be praying for you. We really believe in you. We are excited about the future. And so thank you so much for coming. We'll hang out for a few minutes, and then we'll all head over to the session. Thanks so much for coming this morning.